Step into the hushed, reverent atmosphere of the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, 1937. The air is thick with the murmur of awe. Before us hangs a canvas that has just been declared the greatest masterpiece of Johannes Vermeer's career. It is The Supper at Emmaus. To the untrained eye, and indeed to the most celebrated experts of the pre-war era, it is a quintessential Vermeer. The signature ultramarine, the play of light cascading from a hidden window on the left, the suspended silence that seems to hold the breath of the 17th century, it is all there. The scene depicts a spiritual revelation, the moment Christ breaks bread with his disciples, bathed in that distinct, ethereal glow that only the master of Delft seemingly could conjure. But lean closer. Press your face against the glass of history until your breath fogs the surface. Look past the subject, past the pious expressions, and into the very molecular structure of the paint. What you are seeing is not the divine hand of a Dutch Golden Age genius. You are looking at a lie so chemically complex, so artistically audacious, that it broke the timeline of art history itself. This canvas is not a window into the 1600s. It is a mirror reflecting the desperation and cunning of the 1930s. The creator of this illusion was Hermann Göring, a man who, by all accounts, should have been a footnote in history. But von Meegeren was not merely a painter, he was an alchemist of deception. He understood that to forge a Vermeer, one does not simply copy a style. One must fabricate time itself. Oil paint, you see, takes decades, sometimes centuries, to fully harden and develop that distinct spiderweb network of cracks known as craquelure. Fresh oil paint is soft. It smells of linseed and turpentine. It dissolves under alcohol. A simple swab test by a suspicious curator would wipe away a modern forgery like a smudge on a mirror. Von Meegeren knew this. His challenge was to condense 300 years of oxidation and chemical hardening into a single afternoon. He retreated to his studio in the south of France, transforming it into a laboratory that resembled a witch's kitchen more than an artist's atelier. He experimented with dangerous, volatile compounds, searching for a medium that would harden instantly and resist solvents. He found his answer in an unlikely material, Bakelite. Yes, the same hard synthetic plastic used to mold telephones and radios in the early 20th century. Von Meegeren discovered that by mixing phenol formaldehyde, the raw resin of Bakelite, with lilac oil to delay the setting, he could create a paint that flowed like oil, but when heated, fused into a substance as hard as stone. Imagine the scene. The masterpiece is finished. The figures of Christ and the disciples are rendered in pigments he ground himself by hand, ensuring no modern chemical traces could be found. He used genuine lapis lazuli for the blue, costing a fortune, rather than the cheaper synthetic ultramarine available in his day. But the painting is still fresh, sticky, undeniably new. Now comes the fire. Van Meegeren places the canvas into a custom-built electric oven. He bakes the painting. The heat polymerizes the resin, turning the plastic-infused paint into a rock-hard surface that can withstand alcohol, solvents, and the probing swabs of critics. But hardness is not age. A 300-year-old painting must bear the scars of time. It must be cracked. The baking process naturally induced some cracking, but it wasn't enough. It was too random, too clean. So Van Meegeren took the cooled canvas and rolled it over a cylinder, forcing the brittle surface to fracture in thousands of microscopic, convincing patterns. It was a violent act, a calculated abuse of the artwork to grant it the dignity of survival. Yet even cracks are not enough if they are clean. In a genuine antique, the cracks are filled with the dust of centuries, fireplace soot, candle smoke, the grime of unwashed hands. To replicate this, Van Meegeren performed his final, most poetic act of forgery. He brushed the entire surface with black India ink, letting it seep deep into the fresh fissures. When he wiped away the excess, the ink remained only in the cracks, simulating centuries of accumulated dirt. He didn't stop there. He bought authentic 17th century canvases, scraping off lesser paintings to reuse the old stretchers and tacks, ensuring that even X-rays would reveal threads woven in the correct era. He mixed his paints in badger hair brushes, identical to those used by Vermeer. He was meticulous, paranoid, and brilliant. When the supper at Emmaus was presented to Abraham Bradius, the world's leading authority on Dutch Old Masters, Bradius didn't see plastic. He didn't see an oven-baked fraud. He saw a miracle. He saw the missing link in Vermeer's oeuvre that he had always theorized must exist. He wrote, almost weeping with joy, "We have here I am inclined to say, the masterpiece of Johannes Vermeer of Delft." The trap was sprung. The world accepted the lie because it was beautiful and because the science of the forgery was, for the time, undetectable. Van Meegeren had not just painted a picture, he had engineered a physical object that defied the laws of time, proving that with enough chemistry and audacity, history itself could be synthesized in an oven. To understand why hanvanmeegeren went to such extraordinary lengths, why he spent years inhaling toxic fumes and risking his reputation, we must look beyond the simple allure of profit. While the millions of guilders he eventually amassed were a welcome side effect, the true engine of his deception was a burning, cold-blooded desire for revenge. Van Meegeren was a man out of time, born into a world that was rapidly hurtling towards modernism, cubism, and surrealism. He was a staunch traditionalist. He worshipped the Golden Age. He believed in anatomical correctness, in the sublime handling of light, in the romantic ideals of the past. But the art world of the 1920s and 30s had moved on. The critics, the gatekeepers of taste, sneered at his work. They called his portraits derivative, his biblical scenes kitsch, his technical skill merely a parlor trick without soul. They dismissed him as a relic, a painter who could copy the past but had nothing to say about the present. This rejection festered in Van Meegeren's soul like a gangrenous wound. He didn't just want to prove he was a good painter. He wanted to humiliate the very people who had cast him aside. He wanted to expose their ignorance, their arrogance, and their hypocrisy. He weaponized confirmation bias, realizing that critics didn't actually look at art with objective eyes. They looked with their egos. They saw what they expected to see. And so, he set a trap specifically designed for the experts. He knew that art historians, particularly Abraham Bradius, had long speculated that Vermeer had been influenced by the Italian Caravaggists in his youth. They theorized that there must be a religious period in Vermeer's lost years, paintings of biblical scenes done in the style of the master, which had never been found. It was a gaping hole in art history, a blank page that every scholar desperately wanted to fill. Van Meegeren decided to paint that blank page. He didn't copy an existing Vermeer. That would be too easy to spot. Instead, he created an original composition that perfectly fit the theoretical description of this missing period. He gave them exactly what they were praying for. He painted the supper at Emmaus with the heavy eyelids, the slightly clumsy composition, and the specific lighting that Bradius had theorized a young Italian-influenced Vermeer would possess. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. By validating the theories of the experts, he ensured they would fight to defend the painting's authenticity. To declare the painting a fake would be to admit their own theories were wrong. Van Meegeren wasn't just forging a painting, he was forging evidence to support the intellectual vanity of his enemies. The irony is palpable. The very qualities that critics despised in Van Meegeren's own signed work, the sentimentality, the theatricality, the slightly heavy-handed religious emotion, were hailed as spiritual depth and profound humanity when they believed the signature read IV, Meer. When he painted as himself, he was a hack. When he painted as Vermeer, he was a genius. It proved his point entirely. The signature mattered more than the art. The perception of value was an illusion, dictated by the names on the museum placards rather than the pigment on the canvas. As Europe descended into the chaos of the Second World War, Van Meegeren's private war against the critics spiraled into a dangerous, high-stakes game. The Nazis, voracious consumers of pure Aryan art, began to take notice. Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarshal, a man who plundered the galleries of Europe to feed his obsession with old masters, wanted a Vermeer, and Van Meegeren, through a network of shady dealers, provided one. He sold Christ with the Woman Taken in Adultery, another Bakelite forgery, to Göring for a then record sum. This transaction would be his undoing, but also his strange salvation. He was selling fake cultural heritage to the enemy, effectively swindling the Nazis. In his mind, perhaps, this was the ultimate validation. If his work was good enough to fool the critics, the curators, and now the most powerful art thief in the Third Reich, surely he was the master he always claimed to be. A deep-seated resentment had transformed into a god complex. He was the puppet master, pulling the strings of the art world, making the elite dance to a tune he had composed in his oven in Nice. He had successfully rewritten history, and for a few glorious, terrifying years, the world believed his fiction was fact. The curtain fell on Van Meegeren's Grand Theater in 1945. The war ended, and the Allied forces, sifting through the salt mines of Austria where the Nazis had hidden their looted treasures, discovered the Vermeer in Göring's private collection. The paper trail led back to the Netherlands, back to a wealthy, eccentric artist named hanvanmeegeren. The charge was not forgery. It was treason. The Dutch authorities believed Van Meegeren had sold a priceless piece of Dutch national patrimony to the Nazis. Collaborative plunder. The punishment for such a crime was death. Van Meegeren found himself in a prison cell, facing the firing squad for selling a painting that he knew was a worthless piece of baked plastic. He had a choice: die as a traitor or live as a fraud. After weeks of interrogation, he finally broke. He uttered the impossible words, "You are fools. I sold no national treasure. I painted it myself." The investigators laughed. It was inconceivable. The painting had been authenticated by the world's top experts. It had hung in exhibitions. It was a Vermeer. To prove his claim, Van Meegeren made a staggering offer. He would paint a new Vermeer right there, under police guard, in the presence of the court. And so began one of the most surreal spectacles in legal and art history. In a rented room turned into a makeshift studio, with photographers flashing bulbs and reporters scribbling furiously, Van Meegeren began to paint Jesus among the doctors. The surreal spectacle of him painting was the final act of his performance. As the image emerged, the familiar heavy eyelids, the clumsy hands, the vibrant blues, the world watched in stunned silence. The experts who had praised him were humiliated. The forgery was exposed not by science, but by the artist's own hand. The trial, held in 1947, became a national sensation. Van Meegeren, the collaborator, transformed overnight into a folk hero. He was the man who had swindled Göring. He was the trickster who had made fools of the pompous art establishment. A poll at the time named him the most popular man in the Netherlands, second only to the Prime Minister. He was convicted of forgery and sentenced to a mere 1 year in prison, though he would die of a heart attack before serving his time. But the dust he stirred up has never truly settled. Van Meegeren left us with a profound, uncomfortable question that lingers in every gallery and auction house today. If The Supper at Emmaus was beautiful enough to make grown men weep in 1937, if it was hailed as a masterpiece of spiritual depth, did it lose that beauty the moment it was revealed to be a fake? The photons bouncing off the canvas hadn't changed. The composition hadn't shifted. Only the story we told ourselves about it had changed. Van Meegeren exposed the uncomfortable truth that our appreciation of art is inextricably linked to authority, provenance, and money. We do not just see with our eyes, we see with our beliefs. He showed us that the aura of a masterpiece is often a projection of our own desires. Today, The Supper at Emmaus hangs not as a Vermeer, but as a Van Meegeren. It is a curiosity, a historical artifact of crime. But look at it again. Where does the true value of art lie? Is it in the name of the creator or the experience of the beholder? Hanvanmeegeren may have been a criminal, a narcissist, and a liar, but in his deceit, he forced the world to confront the fragility of truth itself. He proved that sometimes a lie can be so beautiful, so perfectly crafted to fit our desperate need for wonder, that it becomes, in a twisted way, more real than the truth.